Those were interesting presentations. But Richard, one thing I noticed, you made a lot of reference to the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, and I think it is a valid policy tool which, although it was passed in 2006 and is well known in Vienna and in New York, my experience in working in the field, particularly in Africa, is that it is quite unknown when you actually get onto the ground and you deal with practitioners. And considering what I would call the legitimacy gap that global counterterrorism efforts and capacity building initiatives have had over the last few years, I know it's improving, but the global strategy provided a very good opportunity to add some legitimacy to what was seen as being slightly illegitimate in many countries' program that the UN and others were involved in. Surely there's a huge opportunity to use that strategy, the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, as a policy tool to bring some coherence to the work that the UN is doing on this. And how do you raise that awareness? How do you use that policy tool more effectively, as I say, beyond the corridors of New York and Vienna? Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. And we have one more comment. I just discovered Monsieur Laborde is in the audience, and obviously he's a very, very important UN official in that respect. So, Monsieur Laborde.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I should answer this question, by the way, about the strategy. But Richard will do it, since he's in the panel. Now, what I want to say, you asked what is the added value with all the means that the US and all the countries all over the world have. I think that the first value is norm setting. First of all, we need to have a common understanding of what terrorism means. So we have already 16 instruments on the basis of which cooperation can be done, either at the, I would like to say, bilateral level or at the multilateral level. With the new, I would like to say, threat of terrorism, I mean, now that we know that for example, Al-Qaeda and Taliban are really linked with organized crime, etc., how do you do if you have only bilateral agreements? How you will have, you know, something which is really understandable as a common crime, quote, you know, in the international. I know very well that we have not what we so-call a general definition. We don't care too much about that when we speak about international cooperation. Means that we will have the tools for setting up, you know, the standard for the crimes. We have them in many instances. In the great majority, 95% of the crimes are covered. We have the international cooperation mechanisms, which might be necessary to put, you know, for one case between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries in the world. It might be in the same case that you have to have this cooperation, and it is the case. So this is a real value already. Second, and I want to speak with, since we made the reference to the policy, I think that we have also, as the colleague said, you know, we have also a global policy document which touches all the aspects of counterterrorism with a global strategy. And what he said is, what the gentleman from IESS said, Anton Duplessis said, we have to implement that. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, Richard, the point, not enough people know about how great the UN is and what benefits it can offer. And secondly, perhaps you should impose yourself on certain situations. What do you say about that?
Well, you know, it's obviously up to member states to look after their national security and up to member states as members of the UN to promote the UN strategy. But I think Anton makes a very good point. One of the difficulties of the UN is that in normal gatherings of the UN, for example, in the General Assembly or whatever, you get diplomats who are very good at negotiating things and discussing things. They're not necessarily the people who are dealing with the operational problem of counterterrorism. And the disconnect, therefore, is not necessarily between the United Nations and the people on the ground. It's between the various organs of government within states. So the strategy aspirations are not translated into operational activity. You can't expect 192 member states to agree on a very finely detailed operational plan. They're not going to do that, and it wouldn't be appropriate for them to try. It would be a complete mess. So the point of the global strategy is to set an agenda, is to provide an environment in which individual states or groups of states can develop more detailed operational plans. And the UN, of course, the organs of the UN, are there very much to help. I mean, for example, in our case in the Al-Qaeda Taliban monitoring team, we try always to sort of bypass that blah blah, if I may call it that, but I mean it's obviously more important than that, but bypass the discussion to get down into the people who are doing the work, and we convene commonly meetings of intelligence and security agencies from various parts of the world together to discuss particular problems in their region, but also problems that they see more globally, and bring those up to the level of Security Council attention. And I think that sort of flow, an operational flow, has been extremely valuable, and that will also happen, I hope, as we go forward with the global strategy.
Would anyone else like to respond? Eric?
I think one thing we have to keep in mind, and not to turn this into a sort of a in-depth discussion of what is good and what is bad about the UN and counterterrorism, but just if there's an interest in bringing the UN framework to the field, one has to bring the UN to the field to sell it. And I think what you've seen over the years is a very robust UNCT architecture developed, but it's all based in New York and Vienna. And you don't get the UN's counterterrorism work integrated into the UN's work on the ground or at the regional level. It's seen as a separate part of the UN's agenda, and you really just don't get that transfer of expertise and information from the UN headquarters into the field as you get on the development issues, governance issues, all sorts of programmatic issues where you have active UN presences on the ground. And so I think the challenge for the UN and for member states is to not just talk about the need for bringing the UN strategy into the field and into ministries, but actually getting people on the ground from the UN who can do that and help that. Because the UN frameworks, whether in, again, environment, governance, blah, 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 they don't get injected into the national bloodstreams of governments by osmosis. There are UN presences on the ground helping that happen.
Mm-hmm. Let me take one more question before I allow all of you to sum up. That was John Saka here, trustee of ICSR.
Thank you, Peter. As a trustee of ICSR, I just want to remind the meeting that we did publish a paper on radicalization on the internet. It seems to me that there's a remarkable silence in this discussion about the internet, cyberspace, cybercrime, and cyberterrorism. There's a whole field here, and I wonder whether the silence is partly due to the fact that nothing on the internet is really safe, and nobody likes to admit it, that the whole field can be penetrated and is, that anybody can tap anything and get anywhere. Why are we ignoring cyberspace in this discussion?
Okay, so we're no longer ignoring it now. Dr. Hanning, is the role of the internet has increased, obviously. Does that perhaps provide an additional reason for enhancing international cooperation?
Yes, of course. Internet is a big problem for us.